The fire had taken more than her parents' barn that night in 1878. It had taken the smooth skin from her left arm and shoulder, replacing it with ridges and valleys that looked like melted candle wax beneath her sleeve. Delilah Winters stood at the edge of the dusty street in Willits, California, watching the afternoon stagecoach arrive with her good arm wrapped protectively around a basket of fresh baked bread she hoped to sell at the mercantile. She had learned to move through the world like a shadow, keeping her damaged side turned away from curious eyes, her high-collared dresses buttoned to her throat, even in the sweltering summer heat that baked the Northern California valley. The stagecoach door swung open, and a tall figure emerged, his boots hitting the packed earth with a confident thud. Delilah glanced up from beneath the brim of her bonnet and felt her breath catch despite herself. The man was lean and sun-bronzed, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that he removed to wipe the dust from his face with a bandana. There was something about the way he stood, surveying the town with careful attention, that suggested he was a man who missed very little. "Excuse me, miss," he said, turning those startling eyes directly on her. "Could you point me toward the cattle office? I am looking for work with one of the ranches around here." Delilah felt her throat tighten. She gestured down the street with her right hand, keeping her left side angled away. 3 buildings down on the right side, the sign says Mendocino Cattle Company. "Much obliged," he said, and his voice was warm like honey in tea. "I am Lucas Oakes, just arrived from Colorado looking for a fresh start." "Delilah Winters," she replied quietly, already beginning to turn away. "Those smell mighty fine," Lucas said, nodding toward her basket. "You're baking." "Yes. I sell to the mercantile 3 times a week." She felt her cheeks warm under his attention. Men did not usually linger to speak with her, not after they heard the whispers about the scarred Winters girl who lived alone in the small cabin at the edge of town. "Then I hope I will be seeing more of you around," Lucas said with a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "A town with good bread and friendly faces seems like a place worth staying." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and strode down the street toward the cattle office, his long legs eating up the distance. Delilah stood frozen for a moment, her heart doing something strange and fluttering in her chest that felt both wonderful and terrifying. She shook her head sharply. Men like Lucas Oakes did not notice women like her, not once they learned the truth. She had made her peace with loneliness 3 years ago when the fire had changed everything. The mercantile owner, Mr. Patterson, bought all 6 loaves of bread as usual, paying her in coins that she tucked carefully into the small purse at her waist. The money would buy flour, salt, and if she was lucky, a bit of sugar for next week's baking. Her small vegetable garden provided most of her food, and the chickens gave her eggs to sell. It was a meager existence, but it was hers, and she owed no one anything. As she walked back through town, she noticed Lucas Oakes emerging from the cattle office with a satisfied expression. He had removed his vest in the heat, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. He caught sight of her and changed direction to intercept her path. "Good news," he announced. "I start tomorrow at the Double R Ranch, about 5 miles north of here. The foreman says they need experienced hands for the summer drive. Seems I arrived at the right time." "That is good fortune," Delilah said, trying to keep walking, but Lucas fell into step beside her. "Do you live in town, Miss Winters?" "Just outside it. A small place near the creek." She did not mention that it was barely more than a cabin, or that she had built half the furniture herself from scrap wood, because she could not afford to buy proper pieces. "I will be staying at the boarding house until I get my first pay," Lucas said. "Then I hope to find something more permanent. Mrs. Henderson seems like a decent landlady, even if her cooking is not quite up to the standard of your bread, I am sure." Despite herself, Delilah felt a small smile tug at her lips. Mrs. Henderson means well. Her stew is filling if not particularly flavorful. Lucas laughed, a rich sound that seemed to roll up from deep in his chest. "A diplomatic answer. I can tell you are kind as well as skilled in the kitchen." They had reached the edge of town where the road forked, one path leading to the scattered homes and farms, the other winding north toward the ranches that spread across the valley. Delilah stopped, knowing she needed to end this conversation before Lucas's kindness made her hope for things that could never be. "I turn here," she said, gesturing toward the smaller path. "Welcome to Willits, Mr. Oakes. I hope the work suits you." "Lucas, please," he said. "And thank you for the directions earlier. Perhaps I will see you around town." "Perhaps," Delilah said noncommittally, then hurried away before he could say anything else. She could feel his eyes on her back as she walked, and she resisted the urge to look over her shoulder. Men like Lucas Oakes pass through towns like Willits all the time, restless cowboys looking for work or adventure. He would be gone by autumn, riding towards some new horizon, and she would still be here, baking bread and tending her garden and living half a life in the shadows. Her cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by oak trees, with a creek bubbling nearby that provided fresh water year-round. It had belonged to her parents before the fire, before her father's grief had driven him to drink and an early grave, before her mother had followed him 6 months later from a broken heart and a winter fever. Delilah had been 19 then, suddenly alone with nothing but the cabin, the garden, and the chickens. She was 22 now, and she had learned to survive on her own terms. Inside, she changed from her town dress into her work clothes, always careful to keep the bedroom curtains drawn so no one could glimpse her scars. The fire had splashed up her left arm from wrist to shoulder, crept across her collarbone, and licked at the left side of her neck. The doctors had done what they could, but the skin had healed in twisted ridges and patches of angry red that faded to pale pink, but never disappeared. She had learned to sleep on her right side, to dress in the dark, to avoid mirrors and the pitying looks of townspeople who whispered about what a shame it was that the Winters girl had been so pretty before the accident. That evening, as she fed her chickens and watered her garden in the cooling air, her mind kept drifting back to Lucas Oakes and his creek water eyes. She scolded herself for the foolishness. He had simply been polite, the way a decent man was polite to any woman he met in a new town. It had meant nothing. It would lead nowhere. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the creek and the crickets, she allowed herself a few moments of fantasy. What would it be like to have someone look at her the way Lucas had looked at her in the street, with genuine interest and warmth? What would it be like to have someone to talk to in the evenings, to share the small triumphs and challenges of the day? What would it be like to be touched with affection instead of pity? She fell asleep with those thoughts swirling through her mind, and she dreamed of strong, gentle hands and a voice like honey in tea. The next few weeks fell into their usual rhythm. Delilah baked bread, tended her garden, and made her quiet trips into town to sell her goods. But increasingly, she found herself running into Lucas Oakes. He seemed to have a knack for appearing just as she left the mercantile, or when she stopped by the town well to fill her water jug, or when she lingered near the post office hoping for a letter from her cousin in Sacramento, who rarely wrote. "Miss Winters," he would say, tipping his hat with that warm smile. "Fancy meeting you here." At first, Delilah assumed it was coincidence. Willits was not a large town, after all, but as the encounters multiplied, she began to suspect that Lucas was deliberately arranging to cross her path. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "How is the work at the Double R?" she asked one afternoon when he appeared beside her as she examined a bolt of fabric in the general store. "Hard but honest," Lucas replied. "The foreman is fair, the other hands are decent fellows, and the land up there is beautiful. Rolling hills as far as you can see, oak trees, good water. A man could build a life in country like that. You are thinking of staying then, not just passing through." Lucas met her eyes directly, and something in his gaze made her pulse quicken. "I am beginning to think I might have found a reason to stay." Before she could respond to that loaded statement, Mrs. Patterson bustled over, her face pinched with disapproval. "Delilah, dear, did you need help with something? Mr. Oakes, I am sure you have business to attend to." The dismissal was clear, and Lucas's expression flickered with confusion and then understanding. Delilah felt hot shame wash through her. Mrs. Patterson was trying to protect her, in her misguided way, from the attention of a handsome cowboy, who surely could not have honorable intentions toward a scarred woman. "I was just leaving," Delilah murmured, abandoning the fabric and hurrying toward the door. Lucas followed her outside. "Miss Winters, wait, did I offend you somehow? If I have been too forward—" "You have not," Delilah interrupted, keeping her face turned away. "But people talk, Mr. Oakes. It would be better if you did not seek me out so often." "People talk about what?" "About me speaking to a kind woman who makes the best bread in California." "People talk about me," Delilah said sharply, then immediately regretted her tone. "I am sorry. I just mean that I am not the sort of woman that men pay attention to, and when they do, it causes gossip." "I would rather avoid that." Lucas stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "What makes you think you are not the sort of woman men pay attention to? Because from where I am standing, you are exactly the sort of woman a smart man would notice." Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "You do not know anything about me." "Then let me learn," Lucas said simply. "Have supper with me, not at the boarding house or the hotel where people will gossip, but somewhere else. Let me cook for you at my campsite by the river. I have Sunday evening off, and I make a decent stew. Nothing fancy, but filling and honest, like ranch work." Every instinct told Delilah to refuse, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment and heartache. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for 3 years, yearned desperately to say yes. To have one evening of feeling like a normal woman being courted by a good man. Even if it led nowhere, even if Lucas retreated once he saw the full extent of her scars, she would have that one memory to carry her through the lonely years ahead. "Sunday evening," she heard herself say. "By the river, where the old oak tree grows over the water." Lucas's face lit up with a smile that made him look boyish despite the sun lines around his eyes. "Sunday evening. I will be there at 6 o'clock. And Miss Winters, thank you for giving me a chance." As she walked home that afternoon, Delilah felt as though she were floating above the dusty road. Happiness and terror warred in her chest. She had 5 days to prepare herself, 5 days to decide what she would wear and how much she would tell Lucas about herself. 5 days to build her courage for the moment when he would inevitably see her scars and understand why Mrs. Patterson had tried to warn him away. The week dragged and flew simultaneously. Delilah threw herself into her work, baking extra bread, weeding every inch of her garden, scrubbing the cabin until it gleamed even though Lucas would never see it. On Saturday, she took her egg money and bought a length of pale blue fabric from the general store, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's raised eyebrows. She stayed up late that night sewing a new dress, one that still covered her scars but was prettier than her usual practical garments. The color reminded her of a summer sky, and it made her dark hair and eyes stand out. Sunday arrived hot and clear. Delilah spent the morning at church, sitting in her usual back pew and trying to focus on the sermon instead of the evening ahead. Reverend Mitchell droned on about duty and righteousness, but all Delilah could think about was Lucas's smile and the way his voice wrapped around her name like a caress. She went home after the service and took a cold bath in the creek, scrubbing herself with the lavender soap she saved for special occasions. She dressed carefully in the new blue dress, pinning her dark hair up in a style that was softer than her usual severe bun. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand and barely recognized the young woman staring back, eyes bright with nervous anticipation, cheeks flushed with color. At 5:45, she walked to the river, following the path through the oak trees until she reached the spot where an ancient tree spread its branches over the water, creating a pool of shade. Lucas was already there, building a fire in a stone ring. He had spread a blanket on the ground and set out tin cups, plates, and a Dutch oven that simmered with something that smelled of beef and herbs. He looked up as she approached, and his expression made her breath catch. "Miss Winters," he said softly, "you look beautiful. That dress is the color of the sky and it suits you." "Thank you," Delilah managed, suddenly shy. "And thank you for inviting me. This is very kind." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Lucas said, rising to greet her properly. "I wanted to spend time with you away from the watchful eyes of the town. I wanted to talk to you without interruptions. I wanted to get to know the woman who has occupied my thoughts since the moment I saw her standing in the street with a basket of bread." They sat on the blanket, and Lucas served the stew with biscuits he admitted sheepishly that he had bought from the boarding house. "I am a decent camp cook, but my baking skills do not come close to yours," he said. The stew was, as promised, filling and well seasoned. They ate as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lucas told her about growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, about losing both his parents to a harsh winter when he was 17, about spending the next 7 years working various ranches and learning the cattle trade. He had a warm, easy way of talking that made Delilah relax despite her nervousness. "What brought you to California?" she asked. "Restlessness, mostly," Lucas admitted. "I kept thinking there had to be more than just drifting from one job to the next. I wanted to find a place that felt like home where I could put down roots, maybe save enough to buy my own piece of land someday, run my own small herd. But I was starting to think that was just a fool's dream until I came here. And now," Lucas looked at her directly, "now I think maybe I have found what I was looking for, but that depends on a lot of things." Delilah's heart hammered. "On what things?" "On whether a certain woman might be willing to spend more time with me. On whether she might see past the fact that I am just a cowboy with more ambition than money. On whether she might give me a chance to prove that I am serious about building something real and lasting." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Delilah felt panic rising in her chest. This was moving too fast. Lucas did not understand what he was asking for. He did not know the truth. "Lucas," she said carefully, setting down her plate, "there are things you do not know about me, things that might change how you feel." "Then tell me," he said simply. Delilah took a shaky breath. This was the moment. She could protect herself by standing up and walking away, or she could take the terrifying leap of trusting him with the truth. Her hands trembled as she reached up and began unfastening the high collar of her dress. "There was a fire 3 years ago," she said quietly. "It started in the barn and spread to the house. My father and I tried to save the horses. I was carrying a lantern and it fell. The oil splashed on me and ignited. My father put out the flames, but the damage was done. She pulled the fabric away from her left shoulder and neck, exposing the scarred skin to the fading sunlight. She could not look at Lucas, could not bear to see disgust or pity replace the warmth in his eyes. She kept her gaze fixed on the river, waiting for the inevitable retreat. Instead, she felt the gentle touch of fingertips on her shoulder. She gasped and jerked her head around to find Lucas kneeling beside her, his expression tender and serious. His fingers traced the ridges of scarred tissue with infinite care, following the lines from her shoulder up to her neck and down to her wrist where she had pushed up her sleeve. "These are not shameful," he said softly. "These are maps of courage. Every line tells a story of bravery. You ran into danger to save innocent animals. You survived pain I cannot imagine. You built a life for yourself when you had every reason to give up. How could I see these as anything but beautiful?" Delilah felt hot tears spill down her cheeks. "People stare, they whisper, they pity me." "Then people are fools," Lucas said firmly. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I see a woman who is strong and brave and kind. I see a woman who makes bread that tastes like home and who has a smile that makes my chest ache when I am lucky enough to glimpse it. I see a woman I would be honored to know better if she will let me." "I am afraid," Delilah whispered. "I am afraid of hoping. I am afraid of believing this is real." "It is real," Lucas promised. "I cannot promise I will not make mistakes or that everything will be easy, but I can promise that I will never see you as anything less than whole and worthy and beautiful. Your scars do not diminish you. They are part of your story, and I want to know every chapter if you will let me." Delilah felt something break open inside her chest, some locked door that had been sealed since the fire. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against Lucas's, breathing in the scent of him leather and sage and honest sweat. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I want that too." Lucas smiled and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then to her scarred shoulder, then to each ridge and valley of damaged skin on her arm. "Maps of courage," he murmured against her skin. "Every single one." They sat by the river until full dark, talking and laughing and sharing pieces of themselves. Lucas told her about his dream of owning a ranch, about the kind of life he wanted to build. Delilah told him about her parents, about the loneliness of the past 3 years, about the small joys she had found in her garden and her chickens, and the quiet beauty of the creek behind her cabin. "Will you let me walk you home?" Lucas asked as the stars began to emerge overhead. They walked slowly through the warm evening, neither of them eager for the night to end. When they reached Delilah's cabin, Lucas took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her scarred wrist. "May I see you again, not just chance meetings in town, but properly. I would like to court you, Delilah Winters. I would like to do this right." "I would like that too," Delilah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Very much." Over the following weeks, Lucas became a constant presence in Delilah's life. He visited her cabin on Sunday evenings, bringing small gifts, wildflowers from the hills, a book of poetry from a traveling merchant, a new knife for her kitchen with a smooth wooden handle. They took long walks along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas helped her repair the roof of her chicken coop and chop wood for her stove. In return, Delilah baked him pies and bread, darned his socks, and listened to his stories about the cattle drives and the other hands at the Double R. The town noticed, of course. There were whispers and raised eyebrows. Mrs. Patterson pulled Delilah aside one day at the mercantile and said, in a hushed voice, "Are you certain this is wise, dear? Mr. Oakes seems like a good man, but men can be fickle. I would hate to see you hurt." "I appreciate your concern," Delilah said carefully. "But Lucas makes me happy. Whatever happens, I would rather have this joy now than spend my whole life hiding from the possibility of pain." Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house owner, had a different perspective. She cornered Lucas one morning at breakfast and said bluntly, "That Winters girl is a good woman. If you are toying with her, you will answer to me and every other decent woman in this town. But if your intentions are honorable, then you have my blessing. She deserves happiness." "My intentions are completely honorable," Lucas assured her. "Delilah is the finest woman I have ever met, and I intend to marry her if she will have me." The words, once spoken aloud, felt right and true. Lucas realized he had known it for weeks, maybe from the first moment he had seen Delilah standing in the street with her basket and her guarded expression. She was home. She was the reason he had been restless for so long, searching for something he could not name. She was the answer to the question his heart had been asking, but he did not want to rush her. Delilah was learning to trust again, learning to believe that she was worthy of love and devotion. Lucas was patient, content to take things slowly, to earn her trust one day at a time. In late July, the foreman at the Double R pulled Lucas aside after a long day of moving cattle to higher pasture. "You are a good worker, Oakes, best hand we have had in years. I want to offer you a permanent position as assistant foreman, starting in the fall. Better pay, a cabin of your own on the ranch property. What do you say?" Lucas felt excitement surge through him. "I say yes, sir. Thank you. This means a great deal to me." That evening he rode directly to Delilah's cabin, arriving dusty and tired but grinning broadly. She was in her garden, picking tomatoes in the golden light of early evening. She looked up at the sound of his horse and smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed her face and made Lucas's heart turn over in his chest. "You look pleased with yourself," she said, setting down her basket and brushing dirt from her hands. "I have news," Lucas said, swinging down from his horse. "The Double R offered me a permanent position, assistant foreman with better pay and a cabin. I accepted." Delilah's smile widened. "Lucas, that is wonderful. I am so proud of you." He caught her around the waist and spun her in a circle, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kept his arms around her, looking down into her upturned face. "It means I can start planning for the future now. Real plans, not just dreams. I can save money, maybe buy my own land in a few years. I can build something permanent." "You deserve all of that and more," Delilah said softly. "I want to build it with you," Lucas said. "I know it is soon. I know we have only known each other a few months, but Delilah, I love you. I have loved you since the day I met you, I think. You are everything good and true, and I want to spend my life making you happy if you will let me." Delilah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was so afraid to say it, afraid to believe it was real. But I do. I love you, Lucas Oakes." He kissed her then, properly, for the first time. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like summer and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "Marry me," Lucas said. "Not right now, not until you are ready. But someday when you feel certain, marry me and let me spend the rest of my life showing you how precious you are." "Yes," Delilah said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, and I am certain now, Lucas. I have never been more certain of anything." They were married on a clear September morning in the small church in Willits. Delilah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she and Lucas had picked out together from a shop in the larger town of Ukiah, 20 miles south. The dress had long sleeves and a high collar, because that was what made Delilah comfortable, but Lucas had insisted on adding delicate lace at the cuffs and throat, because he said she deserved to feel beautiful. The guest list was small, a few townspeople. The hands from the Double R, Mrs. Henderson and Reverend Mitchell. But the joy in the little church was enormous. When Lucas lifted Delilah's veil and saw her radiant face, he had to blink back tears. When he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, he felt as though he were holding his entire future in his hands. "I promise to love you every day," he whispered during the vows. "I promise to honor these maps of courage and the woman who bears them. I promise to build a life with you that is full of laughter and comfort and peace." "I promise to trust you," Delilah whispered back. "I promise to let myself be loved. I promise to build that life alongside you, through whatever comes." They honeymooned in the cabin at the Double R that was now theirs, a snug structure with 2 rooms and a stone fireplace. Delilah brought her chickens and her most precious possessions from her old cabin, which they decided to keep and rent to a young couple new to the area. Lucas carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in what was now their home. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Delilah undressed slowly, her hands shaking slightly despite her trust in Lucas. It was the first time anyone would see all of her scars, not just the ones on her arm and shoulder, but the ones that spread across her collarbone and neck. She stood before him in her shift, vulnerable and afraid. Lucas rose from where he had been sitting on the edge of the bed and came to her. He traced each scar with his fingertips, then with his lips. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Every part of you is beautiful." He made love to her with such tenderness and reverence that Delilah wept with the overwhelming rightness of it. This was what it meant to be cherished, to be valued not despite her imperfections, but as a complete person worthy of devotion. In Lucas's arms, she finally understood that the fire had not ruined her. It had simply been part of her journey to this moment, to this man, to this love. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight, and Lucas's work was demanding, often taking him away for days at a time during cattle drives. Delilah threw herself into making their cabin a home, sewing curtains, planting a kitchen garden, and continuing to bake bread to sell in town for extra income. But even the hard times felt manageable because they faced them together. Lucas never broke his promise. He treated Delilah's scars as though they were badges of honor, kissing them goodnight, running his fingers over them absently while they sat by the fire in the evenings. He never allowed her to feel shame or to hide herself away. When she occasionally fell into dark moods, remembering the pain of the fire and the lonely years that followed, Lucas held her and reminded her of how far she had come. "You are the strongest person I know," he would say. "You survived something that would have broken most people, and you built a life from the ashes. I am in awe of you every single day." In their second year of marriage, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. What if something went wrong? What if she could not be a good mother? What if the baby inherited some mark from the fire that had damaged her? Lucas soothed her fears as best he could. "You will be an amazing mother," he assured her. "And whatever happens, we will face it together. That is what marriage means. That is what love means." The pregnancy was difficult. Delilah suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and the summer heat made her swell and ache. But Lucas was attentive and patient, taking on extra work around the cabin so she could rest, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, and reading to her from books of poetry to distract her from discomfort. In March of 1881, their son was born after a long and exhausting labor. Delilah held the squalling, red-faced infant and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Lucas wept openly when he first held his son, cradling the tiny body against his chest with the utmost care. "He is perfect," Lucas breathed. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but when Delilah looked at her son's face, she knew. "Daniel," she said. "Daniel Oakes. It means God is my judge. I want him to know that only God can judge a person's worth, not other people's opinions or fears." "Daniel," Lucas repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Daniel Oakes. Welcome to the world, son." Motherhood transformed Delilah. The fierce protectiveness she felt for Daniel gave her a new kind of strength. She no longer worried what people thought of her scars because all that mattered was being a good mother to her son. She nursed him proudly, even in the presence of other women at church socials, no longer hiding her scarred neck and shoulder. If anyone had a problem with it, they could look away. Daniel was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious and adventurous toddler. Lucas doted on him, teaching him to ride a horse before he could properly walk, showing him how to gentle the cattle dogs, letting him help with simple chores around the ranch. Watching Lucas with their son made Delilah fall in love with him all over again. When Daniel was 2, the foreman at the Double R retired, and Lucas was promoted to take his place. The increase in pay and responsibility meant they could finally start saving in earnest for their dream of owning their own land. Lucas spent his rare free time scouring the area for available parcels, looking for the perfect spot to build their ranch. In the spring of 1883, he found it 200 acres of rolling hills and oak woodland about 10 miles from Willits, with a year-round creek and good grazing. The property had belonged to an elderly couple who had recently passed away, and their children were eager to sell. The price was more than fair, and Lucas knew it was exactly what they had been looking for. "Come see it," he urged Delilah one Sunday morning. "I want your opinion before I make an offer." They rode out with Daniel perched in front of Lucas on the saddle, chattering excitedly about the adventure. When they crested the hill and looked down at the property, Delilah caught her breath. It was beautiful, wild, and unspoiled, with plenty of space for cattle and horses, timber for building, and views that stretched for miles. She could picture their life here, could see the house they would build, the barns and corrals, the garden she would plant. "What do you think?" Lucas asked, though he could already read the answer in her shining eyes. "I think it is perfect," Delilah said. "I think this is where we are meant to be." Lucas made the offer that week, and by summer the land was theirs. They spent every spare moment that year working on the property. Lucas and some of the hands from the Double R built a sturdy house not large, but well made, with a big kitchen for Delilah's baking and a spacious porch where they could sit in the evenings. They dug a well, constructed a barn and corrals, and fenced the pastures. Delilah planted fruit trees and a vegetable garden, started a flower bed by the front door, and sewed curtains and quilts to make the house feel like home. In the fall of 1883, they moved into their new home with Daniel and a small herd of cattle that Lucas had purchased with his savings and a loan from the bank. They named the ranch the Courage Ranch, after Lucas's words to Delilah on that first evening by the river. Delilah designed a brand that incorporated the letter C, twisted through with lines that resembled the pattern of her scars, a permanent reminder that strength could come from surviving hardship. The first few years of running the ranch were brutally hard. They worked from dawn to dusk, managing the cattle, maintaining the property, and slowly building their herd. Money was tight, and there were moments when Delilah worried they had taken on too much too soon. But Lucas was tireless in his determination to make the ranch succeed, and Delilah matched him in grit and resolve. They faced droughts that withered the grass and forced them to drive the cattle to higher elevations. They faced harsh winters that killed calves and tested their resources. They faced the constant challenges of predators, disease, and the unpredictable market for beef. But they also celebrated successes, successful births that increased their herd, good prices at market, neighbors who became friends and helped during difficult times. Daniel grew from a toddler into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch life. He learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, and he shadowed his father constantly, eager to learn everything about ranching. Delilah taught him to read using the old books she had saved from her childhood, and she made sure he understood the value of education alongside hard work. In 1885, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she was older and more confident, or perhaps simply because she was too busy to dwell on her fears. In the early spring of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Dorothy, after Delilah's mother. Dorothy was tiny and perfect, with Lucas's storm-colored eyes and Delilah's dark hair. Two children, Lucas marveled, holding Dorothy while Daniel peered at his new sister with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "We are truly blessed." The ranch continued to grow. By 1888, they had paid off the bank loan and owned the land free and clear. Their herd had tripled in size, and Lucas had hired 2 full-time hands to help manage the work. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were happy. Delilah had become a respected figure in the community. Her bread and pastries were famous throughout the county, and she often donated her baking to church fundraisers and community events. She no longer hid her scars, wearing dresses with shorter sleeves in the summer and leaving her collar open. When new people stared or asked questions, she answered them simply and without shame. "I was in a fire when I was younger. These are the scars. They are part of my story." Lucas watched his wife's transformation with pride and love. The timid, hidden woman he had met in the street all those years ago had become confident and strong, secure in her worth and her place in the world. She had learned to see herself through his eyes as brave, capable, and beautiful. In the summer of 1889, a young woman arrived in Willits with scars on her face from a kerosene lamp explosion. She was withdrawn and ashamed, refusing to leave the boarding house where she was staying with her brother. Mrs. Henderson, remembering Delilah's journey, suggested that Delilah might be able to help. Delilah visited the young woman, whose name was Sarah, and spent an afternoon talking with her. She showed Sarah her own scars, telling the story of the fire and the lonely years that followed, and then the story of Lucas and the life they had built together. "The scars do not define you," Delilah said gently. "They are part of your story, but they are not the whole story. You survived something terrible, and that takes courage. Do not let fear of other people's opinions steal your life from you. You have so much to offer the world. Do not hide it away." Sarah wept and thanked Delilah. Over the following weeks, Delilah continued to visit, encouraging Sarah to venture out to attend church services, to meet people. Eventually, Sarah began to heal emotionally, just as her physical wounds had healed. She found work at the general store and eventually married a kind rancher from the next county over. She never forgot Delilah's kindness and the example she had set. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Daniel grew into a tall, capable young man who was clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. Dorothy became a bright, spirited girl who loved horses and reading in equal measure. Lucas's hair gained streaks of silver at the temples, and Delilah discovered laugh lines around her eyes and mouth from years of smiling. In 1892, on their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas gave Delilah a gift, a beautiful silver bracelet engraved with a topographical map. "It reminded me of what I told you that first night," he explained. "About your scars being maps of courage. I wanted you to have something to remind you of how far you have come, how much you have overcome. You are the bravest person I know, and I am honored to be your husband." Delilah wore the bracelet every day, and whenever she looked at it, she remembered that evening by the river when Lucas had traced her scars with such tenderness and called them beautiful. She remembered learning to trust, learning to love, learning to see herself as whole and worthy. She remembered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to be vulnerable despite it. Their 20th anniversary found them sitting on the porch of the house they had built together, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel was now a young man of 18, managing much of the daily ranch work. Dorothy was 14, helping her mother with the baking and the household chores while dreaming of becoming a teacher. "You remember that first day when I arrived in Willits?" Lucas asked, his arm around Delilah's shoulders. "I remember thinking you were the most handsome man I had ever seen," Delilah admitted with a smile. "And I remember being terrified that you would speak to me, and even more terrified when you did." "I knew the moment I saw you that you were special," Lucas said. "I could not have told you why, but something in me recognized something in you, like we were meant to find each other." "We were," Delilah said with certainty. "We absolutely were." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky darken and the first stars emerge. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the evening birdsong. It was the sound of home, of a life built through love and hard work and unwavering devotion. "I love you," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to Delilah's temple. "Every day I love you more than the day before. You are my heart, my home, my everything." "And you are mine," Delilah replied, turning to kiss him properly. "You saw me when I could not see myself. You taught me that I was worthy of love. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Thank you for that gift, Lucas. Thank you for every day we have had together." As the years continued to pass, the Courage Ranch became a landmark in the area, known for its quality cattle and the kindness of its owners. Lucas and Delilah became pillars of the community, the kind of couple that others looked to as an example of a strong marriage and successful partnership. They faced the challenges of aging with the same grace and determination they had brought to everything else. Lucas's back grew stiff from decades of ranch work, and Delilah's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they adjusted and carried on. Daniel married a smart, capable woman named Emma in 1897, bringing her to live at the ranch and help manage the growing operation. The following year, Delilah and Lucas became grandparents when Emma gave birth to a daughter. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Delilah felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the unexpected journey her life had taken. From the ashes of the fire that had scarred her, she had built something beautiful and lasting. Dorothy followed her dream and became a teacher at the school in Willits, though she continued to live at the ranch and ride into town each morning. She was courted by several young men, but she was particular about who she gave her heart to, wanting a partner who would value her mind as well as her appearance. In 1900, she married a young lawyer who had recently opened a practice in town, a man who reminded Delilah very much of Lucas in his kindness and steady nature. As the new century dawned, Lucas and Delilah gradually stepped back from the daily management of the ranch, leaving more and more to Daniel and Emma. They spent their days doing lighter work, Delilah in her garden and kitchen, Lucas repairing tack and training horses. But mostly they spent time together, enjoying the life they had built and the family that surrounded them. One evening in the late spring of 1903, as they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Lucas took Delilah's hand and examined the silver bracelet he had given her all those years ago. It was worn smooth in places from decades of wear, but the engraved map was still visible. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The fire, the scars, the hard years before we met. Do you ever wish things had been different?" Delilah considered the question carefully. There had been so much pain, so much loneliness and shame. The fire had taken her parents, her unblemished skin, and years of her life. But it had also led her to Lucas, to this ranch, to the children and grandchildren who filled her days with joy. It had taught her about resilience and courage and the unexpected ways that life could surprise you. "I wish I could have spared my younger self some of the pain," she said slowly. "But no, I do not wish things had been different. The fire was part of my path to you, to this life. And I would not trade a single day of what we have built together, not even to erase the scars." Lucas brought her hand to his lips and kissed her wrist, right over the lines of twisted skin. "Maps of courage," he murmured, as he had so many times over the years. "You are still the bravest person I know." They sat together as the light faded, two people who had found each other against unlikely odds and built a love that had lasted through every trial and triumph. The scars that Delilah had once viewed as marks of shame had become a testament to survival, to the strength of the human spirit, and to the transformative power of being truly seen and loved. As the years accumulated, Lucas and Delilah continued to cherish each moment. They celebrated Daniel and Emma's growing family, eventually welcoming 3 more grandchildren. They attended Dorothy's husband's successful law practice opening and supported her work as she became one of the most respected teachers in the county. They watched their ranch continue to thrive under Daniel's capable management, knowing that the legacy they had built would continue for generations. In 1908, on a warm September evening that felt like a gift from the universe, Lucas and Delilah celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a barbecue, with neighbors and friends from town joining the celebration. There was music and dancing, children running through the fields, and tables laden with food that Delilah and Dorothy had prepared. As the sun set and lanterns were lit around the yard, Lucas stood and called for everyone's attention. 25 years ago," he began, his voice still strong despite his 64 years, "I arrived in Willits looking for work and a fresh start. I found so much more than I ever dreamed possible. I found my home, my purpose, and the love of my life." He turned to Delilah, who sat beside him with tears already gathering in her eyes. "Delilah, you have made every day of these 25 years an adventure and a joy. You have been my partner in every sense of the word in building this ranch, in raising our children, in creating a life that has exceeded my wildest expectations. I love you today exactly as much as I loved you on our wedding day, which is to say with my whole heart and soul." Delilah rose and embraced him, not caring that everyone was watching. "Lucas Oakes, you saved my life in ways that have nothing to do with physical rescue. You taught me to see beauty where I saw only damage. You gave me the courage to live fully instead of hiding in the shadows. I am the luckiest woman in the world to have you as my husband." They kissed to the applause and cheers of their family and friends, and Delilah felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt on that first evening by the river, when Lucas had traced her scars and called them maps of courage. Some things never changed, no matter how many years passed. The celebration continued long into the night, with stories and laughter and music under the stars. Delilah danced with Lucas, with Daniel, with her grandsons. She helped Dorothy serve slices of the elaborate anniversary cake they had baked together. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from neighbors who had watched their journey from the beginning. But her favorite moment came late in the evening, when most of the guests had departed and only family remained. Her oldest granddaughter, now 10 years old, came to sit beside her on the porch steps. The girl reached out and gently touched the scars on Delilah's arm, which were visible beneath her short sleeves. "Grandmother," the girl said thoughtfully, "Mother says you got these scars from a fire. Does it still hurt?" "Not physically," Delilah said honestly. "But I remember the pain, and I remember how frightened I was afterward and how alone I felt." "But then you met Grandfather and he loved you anyway?" the girl asked. "He loved me always," Delilah corrected gently. "Not anyway or despite my scars, he loved all of me, including my scars. He helped me understand that surviving something difficult is not shameful, it is brave. These scars tell a story of courage, and I am no longer ashamed of them." The girl nodded solemnly. "I think they are beautiful," she said. "They make you special." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes yet again, but they were happy tears. This was the legacy that mattered, not just the ranch or the material success, but the knowledge she could pass down about resilience, about self-worth, about the kind of love that saw you completely and cherished every part. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, pulling her granddaughter close. "That means more to me than you know." Lucas came to sit on her other side, his arm going around her shoulders in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their 25 years together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last of the lanterns flicker in the yard, surrounded by the family and life they had built together. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked softly. "I am thinking about that girl I used to be," Delilah said. Standing in the street in Willits, hiding behind high collars and long sleeves, convinced that she would spend her life alone. "I am thinking about how impossible it would have seemed to her that she would end up here with you, with all of this. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you saw past her fear to the person she could become." "You were always that person," Lucas said. "I just helped you remember." They sat together under the stars, two people who had started as strangers and become so much more. The scars that Delilah bore on her skin were matched by the invisible scars that life had given Lucas: the loss of his parents, the years of drifting, the loneliness of searching for home. But together, they had healed each other. Together, they had built something that would outlast them both. As the night deepened, and the family began to drift toward their beds, Lucas helped Delilah to her feet. They walked arm in arm into the house they had built, into the bedroom they had shared for 25 years. Lucas helped Delilah with the buttons on her dress, his fingers gentle on the fabric, his lips pressing soft kisses to her scarred shoulder as he always did. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. "Every map, every story, every part of you." "I love you too," Delilah replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you for teaching me that I was worthy of this love." They made love with the same tenderness and passion that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, and afterward they lay in each other's arms, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. This was peace. This was home. This was the life that had blossomed from the ashes of tragedy and the courage to hope again. The years that followed were gentler, as Lucas and Delilah moved fully into the role of grandparents and elders of the community. They spent their mornings having coffee on the porch, watching the ranch wake up. Lucas taught his grandsons to ride and rope, passing on the skills he had spent a lifetime perfecting. Delilah taught her granddaughters to bake and sew, sharing the practical knowledge that had sustained her through difficult times. They took trips into town less frequently as mobility became more challenging, but their home was always full of visitors. Daniel and Emma lived in the house they had built on the far side of the property, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Dorothy and her husband visited every Sunday, bringing their own growing family. Friends from town made the journey to share meals and conversation. In the winter of 1912, Lucas caught a bad cold that settled into his chest and became pneumonia. For several terrifying weeks, Delilah nursed him with the same fierce determination she had brought to every challenge in her life. She barely slept, sitting by his bedside applying poultices, coaxing him to drink broth and take medicine. She prayed harder than she had ever prayed, bargaining with God for more time with the man who was her entire heart. Lucas recovered, though more slowly than either of them would have liked. The illness left him weaker, more easily tired, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Delilah never wavered. If anything, the brush with mortality made him even more appreciative of the time they had together. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he told her one afternoon as they sat by the fire, his hand clasped in hers. "I want more mornings watching the sunrise with you. I want more evenings on the porch. I want to see our grandchildren grow up and maybe meet a great-grandchild or two. I am not done loving you yet." "Then stay," Delilah said fiercely. "Stay as long as you can, because I am not ready to let you go either." He did stay, through that winter and into spring, through the summer and into fall. His strength returned gradually, and while he never quite regained his former vigor, he was able to resume his lighter activities. He and Delilah took slow walks around the property, pointing out changes and improvements, remembering how it had looked when they first purchased the land. In 1913, Daniel and Emma's oldest son married, and in 1914, Delilah held her first great-grandchild, a squalling baby boy with Lucas's storm-colored eyes. Lucas wept openly when he held the infant, overcome with the knowledge that his legacy would continue far into the future. "Our grandson has a son," he marveled. "We have become the old generation now." "We have earned the privilege," Delilah said, leaning against his shoulder as they admired the baby. "We survived and thrived and built something that will outlast us. That is all anyone can hope for." They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1913 with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, on their porch overlooking the land they had tamed together. The anniversary after that, their 31st, was similarly peaceful. Lucas was now 71, Delilah 68, and they had long since accepted the limitations of aging bodies. But their love had not aged. If anything, it had deepened, becoming richer and more profound with every year. In the spring of 1916, Lucas's heart began to fail. The doctor said it was simply age and a lifetime of hard work catching up with him. There was nothing to be done except keep him comfortable and make the most of the time remaining. Lucas accepted the news with equanimity, more concerned about how Delilah would cope than about his own mortality. "I do not want you to be afraid," he told her one evening as she sat beside his bed, holding his hand. "We have had a good life, you and I. Better than good, it has been extraordinary. I have loved you every day for 33 years, and I will love you beyond this life. That is forever, Delilah. Love like ours does not end." "I know," Delilah whispered, though tears streamed down her face, "but I am still not ready to say goodbye." "Then we will not say goodbye," Lucas said gently. "We will say until we meet again, because I believe we will. I believe that whatever comes after this, we will find each other again, just like we found each other in Willits all those years ago." On a warm June evening, surrounded by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Lucas Oakes passed peacefully in his sleep with Delilah holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," whispered to the woman who had been his partner, his best friend, his everything for more than 3 decades. The grief nearly broke Delilah. For weeks after the funeral, she moved through the world in a fog, unable to fully process that Lucas was gone. The ranch continued around her, managed by Daniel and his sons, but she felt unmoored without Lucas's steady presence. She had lost people before her parents, friends, neighbors, but losing Lucas was like losing part of herself. Dorothy moved back to the ranch temporarily to care for her mother, and Emma checked on her constantly. But it was Delilah's oldest granddaughter who finally helped her begin to heal. The girl, now a young woman of 23, came to sit with Delilah one afternoon on the porch where she and Lucas had spent so many evenings. "Grandmother," she said gently, "you taught me that scars tell stories of courage and survival. Grief is a different kind of scar, is it not? It is the mark left by love, and you would not wish away the love, even knowing it would lead to this pain, would you?" Delilah looked at her granddaughter with new eyes, seeing wisdom beyond her years. "No," she said slowly, "I would not wish away a single moment with your grandfather. The pain of losing him is the price I pay for having loved him so deeply, and it is worth it. It will always be worth it." That realization became Delilah's path forward. She began to rejoin the life of the ranch and the community, carrying her grief but not allowing it to consume her. She found comfort in her family, in the continuation of the legacy she and Lucas had built. She spent her days baking, gardening, and playing with her great-grandchildren. She told stories about Lucas, keeping his memory alive for the generations that would come after. On what would have been their 34th anniversary, Delilah walked to the spot where Lucas was buried, under an oak tree on a hill overlooking the ranch. She sat on the bench that Daniel had built there and talked to Lucas as though he could hear her. "I miss you every day," she said aloud. "But I am doing what you asked. I am living fully instead of just existing. I am finding joy where I can. I am loving our family with all the love I still have to give, and I am waiting patiently for the day when we will be together again." The wind rustled through the oak leaves, and Delilah chose to believe it was Lucas's answer, a reminder that love never truly ended. Delilah lived for another 8 years after Lucas's death, and they were good years, full of family and purpose. She became the matriarch of the growing Oaks clan, the grandmother and great-grandmother whose wisdom and stories held the family together. She continued to speak about her scars openly, using her story to encourage others who faced their own challenges and losses. In the summer of 1924, at the age of 76, Delilah fell ill with a fever that the doctors could not cure. As she lay in the bed she had shared with Lucas for so many years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, she felt at peace. She had lived a full life, far beyond what that frightened young woman in Willits had ever dreamed possible. She had loved deeply and been loved in return. She had survived tragedy and built something beautiful from the ruins. "Do not be sad," she told her family in her last lucid moments. "I have had the most wonderful life, and now I am going to see your grandfather again. Tell the little ones about us. Tell them about maps of courage and the kind of love that sees past scars to the beauty beneath. Tell them that it is always worth it to hope, even when hope seems foolish." Delilah Winters Oaks died on a clear August morning, her hand held by Dorothy on one side and Daniel on the other. Her last word was "Lucas," spoken with joy and anticipation rather than sorrow. They buried her beside Lucas under the oak tree, and the entire community turned out for the funeral. The minister spoke of her courage, her kindness, her unwavering faith. But it was Daniel who gave the most moving eulogy, speaking of how his parents' love had shaped his understanding of what marriage and partnership could be. "My father used to say that my mother's scars were maps of courage," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. But their love story was its own kind of map, a guide showing us how to build something lasting, how to see beauty in unexpected places, how to love someone completely and without reservation. They gave us a legacy that will echo through generations. We stand here today, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, as living proof that love like theirs changes the world. The Courage Ranch continued to thrive for generations, remaining in the Oaks family and becoming known throughout California for its quality cattle and horses. The story of Lucas and Delilah became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The silver bracelet with the engraved map was passed down to Delilah's oldest granddaughter, who wore it proudly and eventually passed it to her own daughter, ensuring that the symbol of courage and love would continue. In time, the town of Willits grew and changed, but the memory of the cowboy and the scarred woman who had found each other there remained. Their love story became part of the local lore, a reminder that true love sees past surface imperfections to the soul beneath, and that courage can bloom even in the aftermath of tragedy. The house that Lucas built still stands on the Courage Ranch, preserved by the Oaks family as a testament to their ancestors' determination and devotion. Visitors can see the porch where Lucas and Delilah spent their evenings, the kitchen where Delilah baked her famous bread, the bedroom where they shared 33 years of marriage. On the mantel sits a photograph from their 20th anniversary, showing a handsome couple whose eyes reflect a depth of love and understanding that transcends the fading sepia tones. But the true legacy of Lucas and Delilah Oaks is not found in buildings or photographs. It lives in the descendants who carry their genes and their values forward into new generations. It lives in the stories told on summer evenings about a cowboy who saw beauty where others saw only damage, and a woman who found the courage to accept love she thought she did not deserve. It lives in the understanding that scars, whether physical or emotional, are not marks of shame but evidence of survival, maps of the journeys that shape us into who we are meant to become. And somewhere beyond this world, in whatever comes after, two souls who found each other against unlikely odds continue their love story, no longer constrained by aging bodies or the limitations of mortal life. They are together again, as they always believed they would be, their love proving itself stronger than death, as enduring as the California hills they once tamed together, as constant as the creek that still runs through the land they made their own. Their story serves as a reminder that the deepest love often begins with truly seeing another person, scars and all, and choosing to cherish every part of them. It reminds us that courage comes in many forms, including the courage to trust, to hope, and to open your heart even when you have every reason to keep it guarded. It teaches us that the marks life leaves on us are not diminishments, but rather evidence of our resilience, our capacity to survive and even thrive after hardship. The summer sun still sets over the Courage Ranch, painting the hills in gold and crimson, just as it did on that September evening in 1892, when Lucas and Delilah sat on their porch celebrating their 10th anniversary. The cattle still graze the rolling pastures, horses still run in the corrals, and the creek still bubbles peacefully through the property. The land endures, shaped by the two people who loved it and each other with equal passion, a testament to the kind of legacy that matters most, not wealth or fame, but love given freely and received gratefully, courage shared and multiplied, and hope that refuses to die even in the darkest moments. This is the story of She Was Ashamed of Scars from Fire's Kiss. The cowboy traced them gently and called them maps of courage. It is a story of transformation, of healing, of the redemptive power of love that sees beyond surface wounds to the beauty of the human spirit. It is a story that began with pain and shame but ended with joy and legacy. And it is a story that reminds us all that we are more than our scars, more than our past hurts, more than the cruel judgments of those who cannot see past the surface. We are stories of survival, maps of courage, worthy of love that cherishes every part of who we are and who we have fought to become.